Good morning and welcome to this side event at the Sweden Innovation Days on the Swedish-Indonesian Sustainability Partnership. My name is Paul Westin and I'm a senior business developer at the Swedish Energy Agency and we are broadcasting from the Business Sweden studio here in Stockholm. And with me today I have a distinguished panel of guests with His Excellency Kamapradipta Isnomo, Ambassador to Sweden for the Republic of Indonesia, also Mr. Nicki Khorram-Manesh from the Foreign Ministry, and Dr. Fumi Harahap from the Royal Institute of Technology. As I mentioned, we have the title is Sweden-Indonesia Sustainability Partnership, but for the Swedish audience, at least, Indonesia is not very well known. It's often mixed up with my friends with the Philippines, so I thought I'd make a top 10 list of Indonesia and why Indonesia. So, number one, it has the largest Muslim population in the world. It also has the largest geothermal potential in the world. I'm from the Energy Agency, so I like to say that. It has the second largest biodiversity in the world. Jakarta is also sometimes considered the second largest metropolitan area in the world. It's the third largest democracy of the world. It has the fourth largest overall population. It is 5 times larger than Sweden. It is the 6th largest area by size if you look at exclusive economic zones, if you also count the territorial waters. So it's a very large country. And that makes it 5 times larger than Sweden. But if you count the territorial waters, it's 10 times larger than Sweden. It's the 7th largest country by GDP if we have GDP by purchase parity. And of course it's the 16th largest economy of the world in nominal terms, so it's a G20 country. And when we go to the hundreds, Indonesia has hundreds of ethnic groups, 700 languages, and 10,000 islands or more. So that's just a little bit of the background and some facts about Indonesia that I think is one reason why we want to collaborate with Indonesia. But the topic is Sweden-Indonesia Sustainability Partnership, and I would like to turn to Nicki. You were one of the architects behind the CISP. You're now at the Foreign Ministry, but you used to be the first secretary at the Swedish Embassy in Jakarta, working with trade and promotion there. Yeah. So maybe you could give us background about the CISP.
Thank you so much, Paul, and privileged to be here. And selamat pagi to Bapak Dubes and Bu Fumi. And speaking of your first points, to all Indonesian viewers celebrating the holy month of Ramadan, blessings on this first day as well. I thought, Paul, that I would go through 4 points, really. The first one being what kind of created CISP, then moving on to the strategy, where we are now, and kind of what was essential to make it work and why it's still in place today. So really it was, from the beginning, a visual exercise, if you will. We looked at the 2030 agenda, the Paris Agreement, universality of that, and tried to kind of tap into where are the Indonesian political priorities and how can we match those with the Swedish resource base. And the Swedish resource base is, of course, broader than just private sector. It's also agencies, it's also academia, and see how can we do more together. So from the beginning it was, it's a win-win situation that creates a partnership over time. And I think this has been truly essential. And the strategy behind that has been threefold. The first one is, of course, policy dialogue. We need to have a discussion between governments on how can we live up to the goals of the Paris Agreement and how can we support each other in that endeavor. That's the main platform, really. That is in turn supported by technology, innovation, and I will steal Fumi's words from before. You know, it's a triple helix concept. You know, how can we gather the whole resource base to support the solutions that Swedish solution providers can bring into Indonesia, and how can that tap into the Indonesian NDC in the Agenda 2030 action plan, etc. So it's both in terms of actual solutions that can be purchased, but it's also capacity building over time. It's engagement between energy agencies, which you self-represent, and that is supported by funding then, export credits, project accelerators, SWED fund, Swedish Energy Agency, and of course private investment. There's a large interest from Swedish companies to engage in a market like Indonesia's, like you mentioned yourself. And this now has been going on for a couple of years. There are 4 programs in place that is excellently led by our Trade Commissioner in Indonesia, Mr. Erik Udar, and his team together with the embassy, Ambassador Marina Berg, and it's the CISP Energy Alliance, Industry 4.0 Alliance, Healthcare, and Urban Transport. All of these are still valid in terms of tapping into Indonesian political priorities and where Sweden can contribute with knowledge, experience, and solution providers. And just my final point on what has been essential to ensure that, we are here talking about this today, political will is essential, whatever you want to do. And I think that has been excellently visualized during the last couple of years. We were fortunate to have the former Prime Minister of Sweden introducing CISP, and that has been followed up very nicely from both sides, manifesting the political will of both governments to engage between Sweden and Indonesia. We have had close collaboration between our respective embassies supporting. Bapak Dubes has been essential in tapping into those contacts in the Indonesian resource base, if you will, to ensure that the process is moving forward. And of course, you need to have a market drive as well. If you don't have that interest from companies, rather than creating an interest, you need to be listening to that interest and creating the platform in which that can be manifested by the companies themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicki. And I want to congratulate you and the embassy in Jakarta, and of course Business Sweden on last year's physical CISP event, which was huge. In Jakarta. It was over 3 days, I think,
yes,
or more. And it really, I think we could reap a lot of results also because I've been active in Indonesia for more than 10 years with the energy cooperation. And finally, we had a lot of signing ceremonies and memorandums of understanding, and there are going to be real concrete projects. I can see really traction going forward. So congratulations on that. I think I would like to, you mentioned the triple helix, so Dr. Harahap, Ibu Fumi, you mentioned we could have the CISP for the first time in physical form last year, but the last time I was in Indonesia before that was actually together with you when we had a big bioenergy conference in Jakarta, also assisted by the Indonesian embassy here in Stockholm, and where you were and colleagues presented also results to Indonesian stakeholders on the bioenergy research that you have done. Also funded in part by the Swedish Energy Agency previously. But after that, tell me more about your experience after that, what you're doing now, and on your collaboration with research collaboration with Indonesia and research in general from your perspective, and perhaps as coming from Indonesia to Sweden, your experience on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul, this morning, and selamat pagi Pak Kama, and good morning also, Nicki. So it's a very interesting platform here, and talking about research and something is in my passion. So if I translate of my experience doing a doctoral study, which is fully funded by the Swedish Energy Agency for the whole 5 years, there are three things that I would like to highlight, which actually very meaningful and transferable for my current research. So one thing is I learned a lot about interdisciplinary research, applied research, and also looking at the systems perspective. I'm now working in the Department of Energy Technology, and energy is a complex. Energy problem is complex, and you cannot tackle it only from one perspective, and it has to be looked at from the system perspective. And this is one thing I learned from my research. Where I work together with, which is part of the partnership between Indonesia and Sweden on sustainable bioenergy production. And also, biomass is demonstrating a clear connection between Indonesia and Sweden. These two countries have a strong and big abundant resources of biomass. And the second thing what I want to highlight is, of course, sustainability. I mean, we cannot compromise on sustainability. And in Sweden, sustainability has been part of the day-to-day life. So it's part of the company, university, and it drives all the visions of the institution, which also brings my current research to look at more on sustainability aspect. And this is important for meeting the climate agenda, reaching the Paris Agreement, and net zero emission. And then the last thing what I want to highlight, and Nicki also has pointed out, is that innovation is important, and the key enabler of innovation is policy. Yeah, so policy has to be looked at from different kind of angle. It's not only about technology, yeah. It's not only about creating the market or demand. So this policy instrument, can it be policy, supply push or demand pull, and it has to combine. It also needs to create a cross sectoral integration, yeah. And I believe in a system that creates connection between different stakeholders. So triple helix model is one thing that I admire from Sweden, and I'm confident in a system that should not left out the university and academia, because that is where knowledge is created, yeah? And knowledge is one step for making innovation. So these three things, systems perspective, sustainability, and innovation, are all transferable to what I'm doing right now. Yeah, so I'm looking, my research focus at the moment is looking at the transformation in the transport sector, where I explore policies and strategies for deep decarbonized transport sector in maritime, in aviation, and also in road transport sector. Bearing in mind, transport is a very complex tool, yeah? So one solution is not enough. It has to be looked at from different type of fuels, different fleet, and different behavioral changes in order to drive the transition towards net zero emissions.
Thank you. And when you talk about these sectors like aviation and maritime, it's inherently global, and it's not only, so you have a global perspective on these decarbonizations and I suppose?
Yes. And this is also important to touch that when we are looking about energy transition, we start from the resources availability. Yeah. So my point of research is to look at where the resources are available. Yeah, and how we can convert these resources in a sustainable way to produce sustainable product, and where we can use it, where we can locate the technologies. Yeah, so I look at also where are the optimal location, conditions to drive the transition.
I was also curious to hear a little bit more about your experience as being in both countries. You did academic work in Indonesia, you did academic work in Sweden, and what opportunities do you see for more people like you doing academic research in both countries, both ways?
Very interesting, thanks for the question. think in research we work based on funding. So we rely on the funder like Swedish Energy Agency or EU Horizon, and that gives also a big opportunity for us to collaborate. But for me, it is important not to wait for such opportunity. I mean, the collaboration and networking should be done way before that. And I believe there are many ways, and research is good to facilitate that, because research doesn't have any hidden agenda. Yeah, it's very transparent. By approaching or communicating directly with university in Indonesia, providing guest lecture, doing joint research through students like master thesis students, which also requires very little resources, but it will lead to a big opportunity.
I totally agree, and I love to work with students also, and to be if I can help them with their thesis work. Ambassador Pakama, may I call you Pakama?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So you have heard a little bit from both Nicki and Fumi, and I'm sure you have reflections on that. Especially on, I know you're very engaged also in the educational and academic issues. But please give us some thoughts about CISP. I know you've been very engaged on that, but please give us a brief talk on what you would like to highlight from the Indonesian government perspective.
Certainly, Paul. First of all, terima kasih, tack så mycket, for having me here this morning. God morgon to all the audience here in Sweden. I'd just like to start what Paul has just mentioned earlier. I do agree that not many Swedes here are familiar with Indonesia, and I agree with that. And I think that has to do as well with the characteristics of most Indonesians, of having the principle of life, of not having too much, not having too little. So somewhat similar to the Swedish way of living, of lagom. So that's one thing that we have many things in common. But I'll just start to add by saying that if you put Indonesia on the map of Europe, the most western coast would be Dublin, and the most eastern coast would be Tbilisi, Georgia. That's how big we are.
It is huge, yes.
And if you put it on the map of North America, the most western part would be Anchorage, Alaska, and the most eastern part would be Manhattan, New York. So this shows to prove how big we are, yet most people know Bali a lot. But that's okay. I mean, it takes time for people to get to familiarize themselves with Indonesia. But I'd like to talk more on how SISP has been instrumental in driving and also assisting Indonesia in our drive to leapfrog our economic status, both industrially, economically, and I'd like to also, while I have the floor, give some highlights about upcoming events that we are preparing to hold in this year, which I think that there should be a high interest from the Swedish side to take part and be part of these events that we are organizing, and we have been organizing since last year. But just to touch on CISP, you know, if you look at Indonesia 7 years ago, our nominal GDP was around 500 billion US dollars. Fast forwarded 7 years from now, 2023, we are at 1.3 trillion US dollars. Sometimes Indonesians like myself have a hard time to understand how could this be, but this is a result of hard work, dedication, and commitment to strong macroeconomic policy, consistency in dealing with our trade partners, Sweden among them, and also catering to foreign investment in Indonesia, which we are increasingly aiming to have all major countries, private sector, to use Indonesia as their production base, production hub in the region. Why? Because Indonesia is very strategically located. It's situated between two oceans of Pacific and the Indian Ocean, between two continents of Australia and Asia. So, but in the process, we are still struggling, and we are still working hard to achieve this transformation, what we are aiming for is to take a great leap or jump from what we are now as a middle income economy into a high income economy. And I think by doing that, we need to focus on three aspects. One is to transform our economy into an export base, transform our industry into 4.0, and of course, utilize the innovation aspect on the economy. And this is where it connects with SISP. Sweden has been very instrumental in terms of SISP with us, and we have been assisted a lot, both by the Swedish government, the private sector, in dealing with three main priorities that we have in our attempt to leapfrog from middle income to high income, namely on renewable energy. This is something that we are very much aiming for, and through SISP, we have been assisted a lot in terms of bolstering our ability and also knowledge in technology. And secondly is transportation. As you know, we are 280 million population, and 40% of them are growing middle income families who are striving to earn their living, to have their own house, and of course to have their own mobility, which includes cars and motorcycles. And thirdly, of course, financial technology, which is digitalization. You know, speaking of digitalization, just last week we had a delegation from our Ministry of Health visiting Stockholm. And they came to Stockholm not only to engage with our students who are studying medicine in Sweden, throughout Sweden, but they wanted to learn more about digitalization in the fields of healthcare. And this is something that we can learn a lot from Sweden, because Sweden has one of the best healthcare system in Europe, if not in the world. And Indonesia has invested a lot in terms of budget, because we see that health is very important if we want to sustain our economy. Because when it comes to sustaining economy, it boils down to a healthy population and a productive population. So in this sector, we could learn a lot from Sweden. Paul, if you don't mind, I'd just like to touch briefly on what we have done with our chairmanship on G20 last year. As you know, G20 is the 20 biggest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity, as well as nominal GDP. Some call it the 1 billion economy club. But last year it was quite a challenge for us presiding over this presidency of G20. Why? Of course, the unfortunate war in Ukraine really hampered our objectives in trying to create a more stable global financial environment, a more stable economic growth, and also a more equal opportunity for developing countries to also enjoy the harvest of economic growth in the world. So it was a challenge for us, but somehow we pulled it through in Bali during the summit. And I could point out, I think, 4 key points which is relevant to today's event. Number one is we managed to agree the establishment of a global health architecture fund in anticipate, God forbid, if we are faced or confronted with another global pandemic. So all 20 economies agree to have this fund immediately running to anticipate a more pandemic, God forbid. Second, of course, is sustainable energy transition. This is very key to what we are discussing here today. I think all 20 economies agree that we need to produce all the necessary legal infrastructure and also physical infrastructure and financial infrastructure so as to enable a smooth transition to sustainable energy. And then the third one is digital transformation, which I have discussed. But I'd like to point another one, which is also important, which is agriculture and food innovation. Why this is important? Because number one, we see that the war in Ukraine has a direct impact on the supply chain of food. and also the cost of food worldwide. And the most severely impacted by this are the least developing countries, the developing countries, including Indonesia. So we have to use innovation and to employ it in such a way so as to make sure that technology in food production, in food science can be utilized to stabilize the price of food, and also to make sure that the availability of affordable food can be distributed equally worldwide. I hate to speak again, if you don't mind. We have two big upcoming events that we have planned since last year. And I think this would be very important for Sweden, because Sweden is also presiding over the presidency of the European Union. And we are very much happy that Sweden is leading the EU, because we, as Indonesia, always look at Sweden as our ally in Brussels when it comes to open trade, open economy, open investment, so on and so forth. So we are very happy, and we are very supportive of Sweden's leadership in the EU. And in this context, Indonesia is this year presiding over the chairmanship of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, a grouping of 10 Southeast Asian countries. And after the summit, which will take late this year in September, we will organize a flagship event, which is called the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum. And we have a date already, so it's going to be held right after the ASEAN Summit, and the date is from 5th to 7th of September this year. So when it comes to date, I think you mentioned about SISP 2023. Mm-hmm. This could be a good consideration to have this event back to back. And this will take place in Bali. So this will be an extra pull factor for government officials, private sectors, and so on. So going back to Indo-Pacific Forum, the aim of this is, of course, to establish a strong platform for ASEAN member states and also our partners, which is the European Union and Sweden, to share and engage on concrete projects related to transportation, energy, and ICT sectors. You see, so there's a connecting Bluetooth or line with SISP. And in this year, we aim to, number one, accelerate development of green infrastructure. So something that is very much a priority for the current government. Secondly is to enhance inclusive digital transformation. And thirdly, sustainable and innovative financing. So I would like to take this opportunity to invite Business Sweden and all stakeholders in Sweden, including the government and organization in Sweden, to take part in this event. And this event, once again, will take place on the 5th to 7th of September. What will be the actual outcome of the event? Number one, it serves us to quantify the new projects that will be signed in this event. And secondly, it will also be an event where we can quantify the expansion of existing projects in the region. So I'm sure there are many existing Swedish projects that are ongoing at the moment in Indonesia. This event would be an absolute opportunity to showcase how strong Indonesia-Sweden relationship is. Lastly, Paul and colleagues, I want to point out the upcoming Hannover Messe event, which is the biggest industrial tech event in the world, which will take place on the 17th until the 21st of April. That's next month. So Indonesia, again, we have been an official partner country for the third year. And our focus this year is we want to showcase our effort to transform our industrial technology 4.0. So we are very serious in this because this is one of the pillars of our government to leapfrog our economy. So we want to showcase our attempt. And during this event, 157 Indonesian companies will be present in the exhibition. They will all be in the Indonesian pavilion. They will be showcasing automotive industries in Indonesia, motion and drives, digital ecosystems, compressed air and vacuum, global business markets, sustainable energy, of course, and future hub. As I said, Indonesia wants to be the future hub for industries in the region, and of course, engineered parts. So I think this is an excellent event for Business Sweden and also big, strong industries in Sweden to drop by Hannover Messe and touch base with our industrial actors in the event. I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry for taking too much time.
No, that's fine, Pa. We still have time, and thank you, Pa. Yes, Hannover Messe Sweden was the partner country just before the pandemic, and then we had a couple of years where we had virtual handovers with Indonesia and did digital events together. I believe from the Swedish Energy Agency this year we do not have a strong presence, but I'm sure that there are colleagues from the Swedish industry and from Business Sweden and that will be delighted to see your pavilion in place. And the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum in September sounds very nice to perhaps be able to go back to Bali. And I'm sure that we will look into that if we can do something back to back. I'm not sure if it's going to be CISP or if it's going to be another grouping of other programs or other thematics, but it's very much in line with what we want to cooperate on. Nicki, you might have some comments. I'm sure you do.
I think this was exhaustive from Bapak Dubes. No, but I think, I was in Indonesia and Jakarta during the G20 presidency, and I can just, I met the persons in charge at Kemlu, and the tiredness of those persons was only overcome by I think the success of the G20 despite the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and congratulations on that and the continued success of your ASEAN presidency. I think in terms of my position now, at least on CISP next year, I think I'm going to leave that to the embassy and Business Sweden in Jakarta. But I think if you extract what the Bapak Dubes says, I mean it's ambition, right? It's encouragement, and it's positive directions in terms of a lot of these political priorities that we have jointly. And I think, regardless of what we do bilaterally, which I hope will be continually ambitious and projects can be extended and new projects can be initiated, I think there are also in the platform of the G7 and G20 very exciting projects in Indonesia and beyond. I want to, since we're discussing energy transition, I just want to mention the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which has, I think, now established a secretariat in Jakarta already. I think it was last month or something. And I think this is with the EU, of course, as being the partner at the table in terms of the Swedish perspective, but I think this is a very interesting platform to see where it can actually lead, because it has all of these aspects that we're discussing. It has policy, it has potential for market-driven solutions, and it also has this kind of triple helix approach with funding behind it. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the Secretariat is able to do with the support of the Indonesian government, and how individual member states, including Sweden and Swedish solutions, can tap into that locally. And that, of course, goes beyond Indonesia. We have Vietnam, South Africa, India as well. I might be forgetting some country. Apologies if I do that. But finally, I think in terms of what we see as Sweden, and I'm not responsible for Indonesia at the MFA, so I will not jump to any conclusions. But I think from a climate diplomacy perspective, I think the IPCC report that came out 2 days ago, I think it was obviously it was dire news. It's now or never. But if you pick up those optimistic streams that actually are there, it shows that technology innovation has already mitigated and can continue to mitigate as technical solutions become more competitive on the market. And I think that can be supported by policymakers and the structures that we can create to enforce those solutions in strategic markets, such as Indonesia. You're not able to do a green transition globally if you don't have Indonesia with you. Full stop.
Thank you. And we're very much committed to be part of the global effort to create and mitigate climate disasters.
And that's actually one of the responsibilities of the Energy Agency also in the Swedish system, is that we also I have colleagues that work with these international climate negotiations, but also with international climate finance and projects. So I know that they are also looking into Article 6 possibilities, cooperation under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement in Southeast Asia, but also in Indonesia. So I really hope that is one tool that we can use jointly between our countries. Do you have anything else from your perspective as climate diplomacy you would like to add? Or?
Yeah, perhaps just what we're looking into, and I think we have all the streams in place, like you mentioned. The Swedish Energy Agency is already looking into Article 6 cooperation, with Indonesia being one possibility, and we have so many different actors within the Swedish resource base that does so much already. We have the Havs- och vattenmyndigheten, the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Resource Management, and the Chemical Inspections Agency, and etc., etc. There are so many people that see the value of Indonesia and how Sweden can support. I think from a headquarter perspective, what we need to do is kind of convene all of these issues and streams into one strategy towards Indonesia, and see how can we support each other, because that will create one voice, but it will also create one platform where we can see, okay, here are the gaps, and they can be filled by private solutions, for instance. So I think that from a headquarter perspective, that's really what we are looking into doing, not only Indonesia, of course, but to kind of grasping a whole plethora of opportunities, I think, in terms of getting more action and delivering on the ambition of the Paris Agreement.
I wanted to ask Fumi if you picked up something specific from Padubes. I picked up when you talked about agriculture and innovation within the agricultural sector. That might connect a little bit to what you have been working on, and I thought that maybe that was one thing, or anything else.
Yeah, I think it's like Nicki was saying, Pak Kama has an exhaustive list about all the platforms, and I'm very impressed, and that makes me also very positive. And confident that all the focus area that we are mentioning, agriculture, sustainable energy, and transportation and digital transformation, are the area where Indonesia and Sweden can work together. And also all the platform, the SSIP and the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Bali is a great place for research, for disseminating the research, and also for research to take a big role, in formulating the policy, because policy is a tool, but in order for policy, for successful implementation of a policy, it has to have a robust and also concrete and science-based policy, science-based strategies are the way to make it happen. And for touching this agriculture, it's also a very interesting point, because it touches upon different sectors. Agriculture for food is one thing, but agriculture also plays another role in energy sector, because this agri-based or forest agro-industry or forestry-based industry is also can drive the sustainable bioenergy production, and Sweden has proven that way. And using that technology, and Sweden has been able to decouple between the GDP and also the emission, as we can see today. So I think that are the points that I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And looking at also Indonesia's potential when it comes to both agriculture, but also the related sectors, but also renewable energy in general, I would hope that it would pick up pace a little bit with the implementation in Indonesia, and to realize also that renewable energy is the cheapest energy globally now. So I think we need to also push that agenda.
Yeah, and to mention the cheapest, when I started working in this field, it used to be the most expensive, but we can see now solar and wind is the cheapest energy option. And the price and the cost has been dropped 80% in the last 30 years. So it's not impossible.
And I'm also, when you mentioned also the staggering economic development in Indonesia, since I've been there 10 years on and off, you can see it on the ground. And you can also see which I think is very important also, the innovative power of the younger generation in Indonesia. They're very savvy, techy, and high tech, and so it's a very, very nice place to be when it comes to also for foreign companies also to invest in the Indonesian workforce and capacity of the brains of Indonesian young people, right? Yeah. So I think we are closing up towards the end of the session. Any final comments, Padubes? What have you picked up and what you look forward to?
Excuse my throat. Can you have Nicki or Fumi say?
Sure, Nicki.
Well, jumping in. No, I think. Again, thank you for inviting, and it's been a great conversation. I think just picking up where Padubes perhaps, picking up on that ambition, I think, from the Indonesian government and how opportunities are there. Hopefully we can, through this panel and the opportunities of fossil-free energy and innovation and technology, see the opportunities in the Indonesian market. And on the other side as well, the Indonesian government seeing the value of innovators and technologies entering the Indonesian market as well, because it's a duality to it, right? You have to have the market driven from the companies, but you have to create a welcoming market, if you will, that can support that ambition as well. So I think we need to just make sure that duality is connected and to ensure a green transition.
I think my last point will be a big thank you to you, Paul, and also to Swedish Energy Agency for having this platform, because in here we can discuss the solutions, and also we understand what problems we are facing from different actors. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm very lucky to be here. And also, this is the word that Nicki had before. Together we can do more. So I think that's a strong word. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pa. Paul, excuse my throat earlier.
It's okay.
There were many important, pertinent points presented by Dr. Harahap and also Nicki about the way forward, about sustainable energy and also innovation in Indonesia. But I'd just like to highlight one point. As of now, we're still relying on fossil fuel. And the government, the academic, the business practitioner, there's a point where we're now becoming more and more aware that if we continue to sustain the use of fossil fuel, it will have a tremendous impact on the state budget, not to mention the environment and the damage it will cause. So there is a great awareness now because, as you know, we have subsidized our fossil fuel consumption, meaning gas, petrol, and also energy. And this subsidy comes in a form where it is so big that it could be utilized for something else, such as education, infrastructure, health, and so on and so forth. So I think we have a strong pressure from the grassroots level all the way into the parliament, trying to tap into the new and renewable sector of of our resources, and also by partnering with many countries such as Sweden in terms of utilizing the innovation part on how we could have more new and renewable sources of energy in the future. I think for me that is the future of Indonesia, and I think we are on the right track, and we are very happy to partner with Sweden on this.
Thank you, Pa. I think that's encouraging to hear, as we have also from my side financed some studies on the fossil fuel subsidies in Indonesia over the years, so we have highlighted the problem. So I just want to, we can end this session. Thank you so very much for being here and contributing. It's been a pleasure. I just wanted to mention, aside from the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum that we already know a date for, we will definitely see something from CISP also coming forward during this year. I would like to mention from the Swedish Energy Agency that we used to have a program in Indonesia for small and medium-sized companies, an accelerator called the Business Accelerator Program. We are now expanding that to the Southeast Asia region. And the information is available both at Business Sweden and the Swedish Energy Agency on how to express interest to joining that program. From the Swedish Energy Agency, we're also investing together with Business Sweden in a sustainability showroom in Business Sweden's Jakarta office, where we hope to showcase the Swedish story on transition, and open it up both for companies and other Swedish agencies as a meeting place for dialogue and business-to-business cooperation, etc. So I'm looking forward to having that up and running later this year. And to absent friends in Indonesia, Business Sweden, we see some pictures here perhaps. The team is in the top middle there, the Business Sweden office. So a big shout out to you. And then you can see some other topics that were highlighted during the CISP partnership days last year, including signing ceremonies and memorandums of understanding, etc. So with this, thank you very much for the attention, and have a nice day.